You take the stairs, and somewhere around the third flight, your legs start complaining. You sit at a desk for 8 hours, and by the evening, your lower back has an opinion about it. You've probably chalked this up to being out of shape. But the real answer is far stranger. Your body isn't complaining because it's weak, it's complaining because it's confused. It was built to do one thing almost constantly, for almost your entire evolutionary history. And modern life has quietly taken that thing away. That one thing is walking. Not sprinting, not lifting. Walking. Here's a number worth sitting with. Researchers studying the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer community in Tanzania, have found that adults there often walk somewhere between 8 and 15 kilometers a day, depending on the season and what they're hunting or gathering. That's not a workout. That's just Tuesday. Now think about your own day. Bed to car to desk to car to couch. If you're lucky, you get in a few thousand steps without ever meaning to. Doesn't that gap feel enormous once you actually look at it? To understand why walking became so deeply wired into you, you have to go back roughly 2 million years, to the point where your ancestors' bodies started changing shape in ways that only make sense if you assume they were about to spend the rest of their existence on their feet. Longer legs appeared. A narrower pelvis appeared, better suited for an efficient, swinging stride than for climbing trees. The arch in the foot appeared, acting like a spring that stores and releases energy with every step. None of these changes helped with running short bursts, and none of them were about strength. They were about efficiency over long distances, day after day, for a lifetime. A biologist named Daniel Lieberman has spent years studying exactly this question, and one of his central arguments is that humans didn't evolve to be fast. They evolved to be relentless. Compared to almost any other mammal our size, we are mediocre sprinters. But over long distances, especially in heat, we're absurdly efficient. Add a functional cooling system built around sweating, and you get an animal that can simply keep going, long after faster animals have to stop and rest. That combination likely enabled something researchers call persistence hunting. Instead of catching an animal through speed, early humans may have tracked and pursued prey for hours, sometimes most of a day, until the animal overheated and collapsed from exhaustion. No spear throw required, no ambush, just steady, relentless walking and jogging, mile after mile, until the chase ended itself. Think about what that actually demands. Not a burst of effort. A body that expects to move for hours without breaking down. That expectation didn't disappear when persistence hunting stopped being common. It's still sitting inside you, wired into muscle, bone, and metabolism, waiting for a job that modern life almost never gives it. Let's slow down for a second and look at the mechanics, because they're stranger than they sound. Your Achilles tendon isn't just a connector between calf muscle and heel. It behaves almost like a rubber band, storing energy on impact and releasing it on push-off. Your gluteus maximus, the largest muscle in your body, barely does anything when you're strolling on flat ground. It switches on hard the moment you're climbing, running, or carrying weight uphill. Exactly the kind of terrain your ancestors would have crossed constantly. You are, quite literally, carrying spring-loaded, terrain-adapted hardware around all day, and using almost none of it. And walking wasn't just about catching food. It was about finding it in the first place. Anthropologists studying the Kungsan people of the Kalahari Desert have documented adults regularly covering considerable distances just to gather plant foods, locate water sources, and move camp when resources in one area ran thin. Walking wasn't exercise. It was the entire logistic system of being alive. It wasn't only adults doing this either. Researchers studying childhood development among the Hadza and similar communities have noted that children are carried far less than you might expect, and instead spend enormous stretches of the day upright, moving, exploring terrain on their own legs almost as soon as they're physically able. Walking wasn't something you started doing later in life. It was baked in from the very beginning, practiced and refined for years before adulthood ever arrived. This is where something interesting happens in your own body, whether you've ever thought about it or not. Walking triggers a cascade of physiological effects that a stationary lifestyle simply doesn't. Blood flow increases evenly throughout the body. Joints get lubricated through motion. The lymphatic system, which doesn't have its own pump like the heart does, relies almost entirely on muscle movement to circulate fluid and clear waste. Sit still for 10 hours, and that system is quite literally struggling to do its job. There's a striking piece of evidence for just how much this matters. Anthropologist Michael Gervin and cardiologist Hillard Kaplan led a long-running study of the Shimane, an indigenous population in Bolivia whose lifestyle involves an enormous amount of daily physical activity, walking chief among it. Their research found the Shimane have remarkably low rates of coronary artery disease compared to industrialized populations, with arteries that, on average, looked decades younger than their actual age. It's not one single factor driving that result, but sustained, low-intensity movement, the kind that comes from a life built around walking, appears to be doing an enormous amount of quiet, invisible work. Even your mind seems to expect walking. Multiple studies, including work coming out of Stanford led by researchers Marilee Opezzo and Daniel Schwartz, have found that walking measurably boosts creative thinking, sometimes during the walk itself and sometimes shortly afterward, even when the walking happens indoors on a treadmill facing a blank wall. It's not a coincidence that some of history's most famous thinkers were also famous walkers. Your brain didn't evolve in a chair. It evolved on the move, constantly processing changing terrain, tracking distant landmarks, and integrating a stream of sensory information that simply doesn't exist when you're staring at a screen. There's also a strange side effect of losing this movement that most people never connect to walking at all. Chronic lower back pain has become almost a default feature of modern adulthood. And while there are many contributing causes, researchers have repeatedly pointed to one surprisingly simple factor. Prolonged sitting deactivates the deep, stabilizing muscles that walking normally keeps engaged throughout the day. Those muscles don't just weaken from disuse. They effectively forget their job, and the spine ends up carrying loads it was never really built to carry alone. Something as unglamorous as an evening walk turns out to be quietly doing rehabilitation work your desk chair undoes every single day. So why does modern life feel so exhausting despite requiring so little physical movement? Because your body isn't built to sit and think. It's built to walk and think. Walk and hunt, walk and gather, walk and talk. Removing the walking doesn't remove the demand for it. It just leaves that demand unmet. And your body registers that gap as something being wrong, even when you can't quite name what it is. There's a term researchers sometimes use for this kind of situation: evolutionary mismatch. Your genome hasn't caught up to the pace of change in your environment, and it won't anytime soon. 2 million years of walking doesn't get erased by a century of cars, elevators, and desk jobs. The hardware is still expecting the old software. Consider just how recent this shift really is. If you compressed the roughly 2 million years since your ancestors' bodies adapted for walking into a single 24-hour day, the invention of the car would show up in the very last fraction of a second before midnight. Office chairs, elevators, remote controls, all of it crammed into a sliver of time so thin it barely registers on the scale your body actually operates on. Your legs, your spine, your lymphatic system, none of them got the memo that anything changed. This doesn't mean you need to abandon modern life and start tracking antelope across the savannah, but it does reframe something. That restless feeling after a long day sitting down isn't laziness fighting back. It's your evolutionary inheritance quietly asking for something it was promised, something that kept your ancestors alive for 2 million years before anyone ever built a chair. So tonight, when you take a walk after dinner and suddenly feel a little clearer, a little calmer, a little more like yourself, you're not doing something extra. You're doing the one thing your body has been asking for the entire time.